lovely. It's the first time I met Jessie. Yeah.
Yeah, she's great.
She is she or they are they or are they a they?
It goes back and forth.
Okay, I can't. I grew up in a binary world and I love the non-binary, but my mind gets stuck in like old like neurological groups. It's a problem.
Or not.
It's a problem. I'm trying to outgrow my binaries in all kinds of ways. But not everyone feels that way, Paul.
You know, my kids actually surprisingly are maybe surprisingly binary. 20-year-old. Very
20-year-olds that are binary, isn't there lots of them?
No, in terms of just their worldview.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they are not quite as
Fluid,
fluid, flexible
flexible, open-minded.
with respect to certain things.
Okay. Oh my God, it's 8:46. I didn't know, and everybody's like following this conversation, and I had no idea. Oh my God, now you know, you all know how I feel about binaries. I'm so embarrassed. It was just like my inner circle here in the room. Shabbat shalom, everybody.
We are
Shabbat
your
shalom.
we are your
Hi,
inner
Alana. Good to see you. Wait, let me just let me see if I can go into gallery so I can see who's here. 1 second. There we go. So, okay, someone who's younger than me. Oh no, I got it. Gallery. Excellent. Okay. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Hi, Jay, grandpa of two. Lana. Hi, I'm Caroline. Thank you for being behind the scenes. Paul, good to see you. Hi, Brenda. Hi, Beth. Hi, Colleen. Oh, you're not in the room, Colleen. Where are you? Okay, you're there. Are you sick? Is that what you? Oh, I'm sorry. Deb, are you new? I don't remember seeing you before, but you just walked away. So sorry, Deb. Well, welcome in any case. Hi, Amy. Bonnie's coming in. Richard. And lots of people. If I don't see your face, I'm not saying hello. All right, I think I didn't get enough sleep. It's making me a little loopy. So forgive that. Hopefully we'll still have a very focused and serious Torah study. And everybody is as well as can be. And today we're going to be looking at like what is divine presence? Small question, strange answers. So I'll say more about that in a moment. And for now, let's do the Torah. Everybody in cacophony, as I like to say. Oops. Baruch Creator of everything, ruler of us all, who sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to soak in your divine wisdom. Okay, I'm going to jump right into sharing my screen. And there's a big question at the end of the Parsha of Pekude. And if you remember, we're at the end of a book, the end of Exodus. Exciting, right? And just like a very brief overview, the first half of the book of Exodus is all about the deliverance narrative, right? That start out the people as slaves and a Pharaoh who did not know Joseph. And people are suffering from hard work and limited breath. And through plagues and whatever, obviously making a very long story short, they are finally freed from Egypt. They go through the Red Sea and they complain for a while, stand at Sinai. We receive mishpatim, statutes and laws. And then, lo and behold, the rest of the book is mostly instructions for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle, and then the building of the Mishkan. And in between those things is the harrowing tale of the golden calf, and also some laws of Shabbat. So that's the structure of the book. And now here we are at the end of the book, and I want to raise a big question. And I went on sort of a meandering journey to find not an answer, but some answers. And we're going to, sorry, looking back at me too. We're going to do something that I've introduced before, a method called intertextuality. Nikki, you remember what that is? Okay, good. So we're just, basically that means we're gonna look in different places in the Torah to see what some terms mean and what some concepts mean and try to put things together. This will be a joint and group exploration. Okay, so I'm starting off with an image. And the image is amazing because it's the end of the book of Exodus. And between one book and another, 4 lines are skipped, right? And the other thing that's interesting here, and we're going to go over these verses in a moment, but that the opening of the new book has a small aleph, right? You see that small aleph, which may be a hint to the answer to my question, which is why couldn't Moshe enter the Mishkan? Why couldn't Moshe enter the Mishkan? Now, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you're going to see in a minute that Moshe could not enter the Mishkan. Now, these are the last verses of Exodus, very last verses. And I will tell you that I put this question that I had on Facebook this week. I got all kinds of interesting answers, and it helped me construct this source sheet. And at the end, you'll see some sources. Oh, I had included my Facebook link, and it's not there anymore. Safari is very strange. I save, and then things don't always save. So I'm sorry. If anyone wants to look at the Facebook post with all kinds of interesting answers from interesting people, including Asher Chaim, I will send you that link. Just email me. Or maybe I'll just add it to the sheet later, and so you could just look at the sheet later. Okay, so here are the last verses of Exodus. And this first, it refers to the finishing of the Mishkan, the finishing of the tabernacle of the sanctuary. Vayakam et hechatzer saviv lamishkan. Sorry, I forgot to number things, but I'll just tell you where things are by way of verses, books and verses. Vayakam et hechatzer saviv lamishkan. And he set up the enclosure around the tabernacle and the altar. Vayiten et masach sha'ar hechatzer. And put the screen for the gate of the enclosure. And then Vayichal Moshe et hamilacha, and Moses finished the work, which is so incredible because these words Vayichal and Milacha are the same words used when God finishes the creation of the universe, right? And it's only one example of the literary parallels, and I think we did this in another open book. Now that I teach the Parsha another night a week on Tuesday night, I can't always remember where I taught what. But in one of those classes, we talked about the parallels between creating the Mishkan and creating the universe. And there are all kinds of literary parallels that plenty of people write about. So you should be able to find information about that if you're interested. Or email me and I'll send you one of my other source sheets. Okay, and then what happens? Vayichas anan et ohel moed. The cloud covered the tent of meeting. So what cloud? We'll talk about that soon. Ukvod Adonai maleh et hamishkan. And the presence of Adonai filled the tabernacle. So that's interesting. So the present was translated here as presence. Is the word for that is kavod, and we're going to look and see what exactly is kavod and where it comes from soon. But so again, the words for presence of God, kavod Adonai, sometimes translated as glory of God, filled the Mishkan. Okay, so something about the presence filled, right? Interesting. V'lo yachol Moshe lavo el ohel moed. Ki shachan alav anan ukvod Adonai maleh et hamishkan. So, and Moshe could not, right, was not capable of entering the tent of meeting Why? Because the anan, the cloud, was resting upon it. And you see that word shachan is a verb with the same root as the noun mishkan, right? To dwell, or to rest, I guess, or settle upon it. Ukvod Adonai maleh et hamishkan. And the presence or glory of God filled the mishkan. So, and then it says, Uvehalot anan me'al mishkan yis'u b'nei Yisrael b'chol mas'ehem. And when the cloud rose from the Mishkan, the children of Israel would go forward in all their journeys, or they would journey in all their journeys, or march in all their marches. And if the cloud did not lift, lo yis'u ad yom he'alat. If the cloud did not lift, they would not set out until such time as it did lift. So just to review, so the children of Israel had this Mishkan, right? They built this Mishkan. It was in the center of the camp, and then they would pack it up, and by day they would follow a cloud, or they would see the cloud, I guess, move and then pack it up. I'm not exactly sure how it worked. And then by night they would see a fire when they were traveling, right? And then they would stop. Okay. Jay, if it's a point of clarification or a question of clarification, I will take it, but I want to do a bunch of text before I go take any. Okay, fine. So I know exactly where I'm headed towards. But actually, let me shift gears. So let me ask everybody, and I really just want quick answers in the chat or very quick answers in the room. Why could Moshe not enter the tent of meeting? What does it mean that he couldn't enter the tent of meeting because the presence of God filled the Mishkan? What does that mean? So I'm gonna stop my share. And I want people to give their initial sense of why Moshe could not enter.
Question,
No questions.
no question.
So Jay, he couldn't enter because the glory of God was on him, but it says it filled the. I don't understand because it says it filled.
Well, that's what we talked about. What does alav mean? It's a very radical interpretation, but you could interpret alav as not the tent, but Moshe. You could, I think.
Interesting. Okay, I'll take a look at that in a minute. Okay, I don't want hands. I want comments in the chat if you're on Zoom. I'll take hands later. Okay, anyone quick in the room since you can't write in chat.
No space.
No space. Interesting, no space. So that's the most shot answer. So shot meaning simple or literal or close to the text answer. So if there's no space, what does that say about the presence of God? What does that mean? I can't go in here because the room is filled with what? The kavod was thick, Jonathan from Los Angeles says. Hi, Jonathan. Yeah, it's thick. So what does it feel like? What does it feel like? And it's that thick that I can't, like, I remember once, I think it was years ago, my husband and I were on a trip. We were driving, and there was literally a cloud on the street. And I remember driving through it. So it didn't stop my car, right? There was a cloud, and I drove through it. I couldn't see very well. Two beings cannot exist in the same space at the same time. Interesting, but is that also true about God? And is that true about our concept of God, Amy? Okay. Anyone else in the room? And I know Jay and Beth, you want to say something, but we're gonna hold on a little bit. One cannot live after seeing the face of God.
Children of
It
Israel
doesn't say
can't,
anything about the face of God being in there.
children of Israel can't enter either, can they?
Correct.
With that hand behind you.
Then
Thinking about,
here, can you say that?
yeah, so we can see
Would that be
a
a-
little light, that's.
Oh, then you
that's
can
why I
say
sit
that.
back here.
Okay.
I'm thinking about the very end of creation.
Yeah.
And God withdraws so
Yeah.
we can be. So there seems to be a dichotomy between, in terms of creating space, between where people can be and where God in mind, but it's at least initially.
Beautiful, Sarah, beautiful. So Sarah's referring back to the Lurianic myth of creation, right? In which God contracts God's self because God and the world and humanity cannot inhabit the same space. God could not create a world, right? Unless God literally pulled God back. And another way to think about it is a pregnant woman making space for a fetus inside it, right? Like making space for what's not her within. If that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So now I want to focus a little bit on kavod. I think about, let's see, until we get to here. So just hang on. Okay. All right. So look at this beautiful line from Psalms. And this is a song that we read when a holiday falls not on Shabbat. If anyone knows the tune. Anyway, goes on. Tsa'u sha'arim rashechem u'sa'u pitchei olam v'yavo melech ha'kavod. O gates, lift up your heads. Lift them up, you everlasting doors. So the King of Glory, melech ha'kavod. So that's interesting. Can come in. So that's a different use of the word kavod to describe God, right? It's just, same word, but whatever, slightly different form. And melech hakavod instead of kvod Adonai. Then it says mihu zeh melech hakavod. Who is the King of Glory? Adonai Tzvaot, Lord of Hosts. Who melech hakavod? As if that's an answer. Okay, now I know who melech hakavod is. Melech hakavod is Adonai Tzvaot. Okay, that's the answer. Okay, next, more about kavod. So this is interesting. In Exodus 14, it says, and remember, Exodus 14, the children of Israel are about to leave Egypt. And God says, V'yad'u Mitzrayim ki ani Adonai, and all of Egypt will know that I am God, right? And one could say that the purpose, plagues, was not only one can say, but it's actually written in the Torah, that the purpose of the plagues was so that both the Israelites and the Egyptians will know that God is God. There are more source sheets here. We pass this place. And it goes, and then it says, "V'hikavdi b'faro b'rechbo u'v'farashav." Okay, when I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his riders. Or maybe when I make Pharaoh and his chariots and his riders heavy. Maybe that's not a good translation.
It's like
It's
himself,
not.
like I glorify
No,
myself.
because I will glorify, thank you. I will glorify myself through Pharaoh, his chariots, and his riders. So how is God going to glorify God's self through Pharaoh and his demise? So the answer is here. As we continue in our story, right, a little further down in Exodus 14. Vayirdefu Mitzrayim v'yava'u acharehem kosu. So the children of Israel, like the Sea of Reeds, has split. They've gone through, and now the Egyptians are coming in pursuit. V'yava'u acharehem kosu sparo v'chbo u'parashav el toch hayam. The Egyptians come in pursuit after them into the sea. All Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and riders. Vayhi ba'ashmoret haboker v'yashkef Adonai el machane Mitzrayim ba'amud eish sha'anan. At the morning watch, and I looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud. So I think this is the first time that the pillar of fire and cloud is being mentioned, right? We started with that image at the end of Exodus. And here, right, we have the introduction of the pillar of fire and cloud. And this pillar of fire and cloud will follow Israel, or lead Israel actually, through all their journeys until they reach the land of Canaan. In an Amud of Ish and Anan, so here it's a pillar of fire and cloud, not separate. Vayaham et Machane Mitzrayim, and the Egyptian army went into chaos, or panic. And then it says in verse 25, Vayasar et Ofen Markivotai. And God locked, interesting, the wheels of their chariots or took them off, which is a meaning of that word that I'm more familiar with. Vayan ha-gehu, I'm sorry, v'yinna ha-gehu, bich-behut. So the wheels, right, drove forward or moved with heaviness. They do, which is another form of a verb of vod Adonai. Okay, vod is a noun, and here it's an adjective. They went for big dut with heaviness. Vayomer Mitzrayim anusa mipnei Israel ki Adonai nolcham lahem. The Egyptians said, "Let us flee from the Israelites, for Adonai is fighting for them against Egypt." Okay, so now let's look at the word kavod. Kavod is a term with both social and moral implications and stems from the root for weight, right? For weight. So kaved is heavy. Kabed et avicha et imecha, right? Honor your father and your mother is like, give them the appropriate gravitas, right? Kavod, respect, gravitas are very much connected. It can mean glory, honor, respect, distinction, importance. And then here from Sepharia, it says glory, honor, glorious abundance, riches, honor, splendid, glory, honor, dignity, honor, reputation, honor, reverence, glory. But just know that it's connected to this sense of gravitas and weight. Okay, I've said a lot, we've done a lot. Stop share, go to Jay, who's been waiting so patiently, and then Beth, who I believe is also waiting. Hold on, let me just.
Well, you may not want to go there yet, but it's a question of why Moshe couldn't enter the tent. Can I still talk about that, or?
The whole thing is about why he couldn't answer.
Okay, well, so again, in my simple-minded way, I always start with the pshat.
Jay,
And
your
what do we know-
simple-minded way?
Yeah. I always start with the pshat and go as far as the pshat as pshat could take me. And what do we know from that passage? We know two things: that Moshe couldn't enter, and the people couldn't move or go anywhere until the cloud lifted, until the glory lifted from Mishkan. So basically, it's all about maybe because of awe, fear, whatever, you couldn't move. Once the glory of God is there in presence, either completely or somewhat hidden, you're paralyzed, you're transfixed, you can't move. And so that's why Moshe couldn't enter. He couldn't move.
Okay, so let's just test that shot a little bit, Jay. So I'm looking at verse 35 and 40, right? It says, Moshe lavo el, and this is the second text on the source sheet. Moshe lavo el ohomo. So he couldn't come in. Why? Ki shachan alav he'anan. So you're saying that it's perhaps because the cloud is on Moshe, correct? That's the alav here.
Right.
Okay, got it. Okay,
And
then
keep
it
going.
says,
Right.
yes, that's what I'm gonna do. Ukvod Adonai maleh et hamishkan, and the glory of God filled the Mishkan. So it seems to me that the reason that we're given for Moshe not being able to go in is because the Kvod Adonai filled the Mishkan.
Well, it depends. The good old vav. Is it a because, or is it an and? And by the way, I realize now that may
No,
not
it doesn't say vi, it says ooh. It
be.
says
Ooh,
ooh.
okay.
That's an end.
It's different.
I don't know enough grammar there, but I realize in you're saying it that I was wrong. It's not about necessarily the holy, which is less, but it's about the cloud. So if you go to the next, so the cloud's on him, he can't move. And then go ahead and read the next sentence.
ובהעלות הענן מעל משכן יישאו בני ישראל בכל מסעיהם.
So when the cloud lifted, the Israelites were free to move.
Correct.
So that's the point. So that's my point. It's the cloud has a paralyzing effect on Moshe and the Israelites. I mean, I'm being very literal in terms of paralyzing, but you could use it metaphorically.
Perhaps, but I can't not take into account here that the glory of God or the presence of God filled the Mishkan into my trying to understand why Moshe could not enter.
Well, but I get you're right, but I'm putting the two together. So the interesting question is, why is it that the people couldn't move once the cloud lifted, but says nothing about the people couldn't move because the glory of the God was in the tent? There seems to be a separation, but with Moshe, there seems to be the cloud's on him, but Chvod Hashem is in the Mishkan.
The cloud actually might be on him, but Vayichas had not et Ohel. No, the cloud
Okay, so
is
let's even
on
say the
Ohel
cloud's on
Moed.
both. All right.
I think the
So
cloud is just a
there's
red
several,
like
yeah.
day
So
one.
the
Yeah.
point being, I think the overall point is that nobody could move. And that's why Moshe couldn't go in. If you take the two sentences together, in essence, everybody was maybe because of awe, what fear, whatever, there was no movement.
Okay, there's a problem with what you're saying, Jay. So I'm going to say one more thing, and then we're going to go on. It's not that
Okay.
nobody could move; everybody could move. What they couldn't do is pack up and journey on. It's not that they couldn't move when the cloud was not moving. As Alan just said, the cloud and the fire are a red light, green light. When do you journey on? Okay,
Yeah.
so
Go ahead. All right. I'll put it in the chat.
if you want to say more, put in the chat. Okay,
Yeah.
Alana.
Shabbat Shalom. So part of what I am struck by in the larger narrative here is the quality of both and that the Torah does so beautifully. That here's Moshe, who has had such incredible intimacy with Yud Hey Vav Hey throughout the narrative of Exodus. From the burning bush to Revelation to the law. And then we're left at the end with this reminder that it's very humbling that there is this quality of Yud Hey Vav Hey of oneness that is beyond what any one human being, even Moshe, can ultimately have can be entitled to full intimacy. So
Yes,
there's both
there are limits.
yeah, there's both intimacy and there's also the beyondness.
And I want to investigate why Moshe was limited here. So that's what we're going to do. But absolutely, there are limits to Moshe's contact with God, as articulated when Moshe asked to see God's face, and God says, "No human being can see my face." And Moshe gets to see God's back. Okay, so anyone else? Yeah, Marla.
I think related to that, the idea of you have only one God, I wonder if there's that temptation that somehow the Israelites could look to Moses as some sort of godlike figure, and this made it clear, no, one God in that tabernacle, nobody else.
Mm. Mm. Even though Moshe didn't go in at other times.
The presence is in there, that's it, that's the presence.
Yeah.
One and only.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, Beth.
Good job, Us. I guess what I'm thinking is that even though Moshe has had these apparently face-to-face encounters with God, in those instances, God has in some way stepped back and made room for Moses, like doing a little mini tzimtzum so that God and Moses may have a dialogue. And in the case of the Mishkan, God's not doing any sort of tzimtzum. God is filling the whole space. And so there has to be some sort of withdrawal of God first, some stepping back of God first before an individual, even Moshe, can interact.
Yes, we're gonna see more about that, Beth. You're going in one of the directions I'm going in. So we'll see about that stepping back in a little while. And I also want to add is one of the things I've learned through posting this on Facebook from Professor Nathaniel Berman is that in the mind of the Zohar, right, the home was just completed. And so it's sort of like wedding at Sinai between God and Israel, home just completed. And now God and Israel making love, right? It's a moment of intimacy. Moshe can't go in. That's a whole other perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, two more comments and I'm going on with the text no matter what. Asher Chaim and then Mark.
I think it's important that since Torah uses two different words, one for cloud and one for kavod, that we
Yes.
make sure to maintain that distinction.
Yes.
The
Thank
cloud
you.
is a symbol, and it's a symbol that's visible to everybody. The kavod, heaviness, weightiness, is more like the essence that must not be looked at. Yes, God and Moshe communicate face to face, but there's a difference between my seeing someone's face on a screen and my seeing their entirety, their essence.
So wait, are
I
you
believe-
saying, Asher Chaim, just to clarify, are you saying that Kvod Adonai, the presence of God, is the same thing as Adonai? I just want to
A
I'm just
physical
asking.
representation,
Or manifestation. I would say
manifestation.
manifestation
Thank
instead
you.
of representation, which the two are different.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to say anything else?
So when the cloud goes up from above the Mishkan, it is a symbol, perhaps, that the essence, the weightiness of Yud Hey Vav Hey is no longer in the room. And now the room can be disassembled and carried to the next place and set up again. And once
Beautiful.
it's set up again, the essence will inhabit it. And Moshe, nobody is allowed into that room, ever. When we get to the next Vayikra El Moshe, May Ohel Moed, God will call to Moshe from Ohel Moed.
Yes, we're getting there. Yes.
And not say, come in here with me, ever, ever. Aaron will only go in once a year to decontaminate, and that's a weird ritual. We'll find out. It's a response to the death of Nadav and Avihu. Stay tuned for future portions. But that space is God's space. And only when God leaves the room are they allowed to cover up the ark and move the furniture and set it up somewhere else.
Great. That was really helpful. Thank you so much. Okay, Asher Chaim. Mark Horn, sorry. Mark Horn.
Good morning, and I just want to complicate things for a minute with a quote from the liturgy, and which probably comes from somewhere else in the Tanakh, which is when the angels chant Kadosh, 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 Below Kol Haaretz Kevodo, that the entire world is filled with God's glory. That may be in the sheet. I haven't gone ahead, but my question is, if the entire earth is filled with God's glory, then there isn't any room for any of us, much less Moshe in the tent.
That's a contradiction, yes. And I don't know how, I think I might have included that source on this sheet. I'm not sure. I think the question is perhaps one of perception, right? So when the scales are removed from our eyes, do we see that the presence of God is in the entire earth as the angels do? That's number one. Number two is, at what intensity is the presence of God filling the earth? Like at what, yeah.
I just have a question.
Yeah, Alan, and then
It was triggered by what Asher Chaim said.
okay, and I promised to go on, so.
Okay,
go ahead.
well, it's just a question.
Yeah,
If Moshe was not invited, why does it have to say that he could not enter?
maybe he wanted to. He didn't have an invitation. Maybe he tried. That's a really good question. So I think what's behind that word, what you're pointing out is what's behind that word is that there was some desire to enter, he couldn't. He didn't have the capacity. Okay, let's go on. So now we are in, Richard, I'm gonna get you in the next round, okay? Okay. So now we're in Exodus 16. We're going forward with Kvod Adonai and its different manifestations and contexts. So this is in one of the early scenes after the children of Israel are in the wilderness and they're complaining. And it says, Vayomer Moshe v'Aaron, and they're complaining about not having enough to eat. Vayomer Moshe v'Aaron el kol b'nei Israel, Erev v'yadatem ki Adonai hotzi etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. So Moses and Aaron said to all the Israelites, by evening you shall know it was Adonai who brought you out from the land of Egypt. So there's still a problem with knowledge and knowing God, right? The whole purpose of the Exodus was for the Israelites to know God, but clearly they don't know. And every time they complain and they want to go back to Egypt, clearly they don't know what power took them out of Egypt and what power is with them and on their side. Uboker reitem et kvod Adonai, and in the morning you shall behold the presence, right? Bisham-o et tlunotechem al Adonai, because God has heard your grumblings against Adonai. Could you imagine you're complaining about your boss, or your boss over here? It's not good news. V'nachnu ma kitalinu aleinu. For who are we that you should grumble against us? Vayomer Moshe b'teit Adonai lachem be'er basar l'achol v'lechem b'boker l'sboa b'shmo Adonai etzlunotechem asher atem malinim alav v'nachnu ma lo aleinu tlunotechem ki al Adonai. Since it is Adonai, Moses continued, will give you flesh to eat in the evening and bread in the morning to the full, because Adonai has heard the grumblings you utter. What is our part? Your grumbling is against Adonai, not against us. So in other words, when they complain to Moses about what's happening, what they're really complaining against is God.
Is that a royal we? Who does the we refer to there?
Moses and
Who are
Aaron.
we? That's Moshe and Aaron saying, who are
Moshe.
we? Because this is really about God, it's not about us. Okay, then verse 9, Vayomer Moshe el Aaron and Mor el kol Adonai adat b'nei Israel. Here vu lefnei Adonai ki shama et tlunotechem. So Moses is like redirecting the complaints. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole Israelite community, advance toward Adonai who has heard your grumbling. V'yehi kidaber Aaron el kol adat b'nei Israel v'yafnu el hamidbar v'hinei kvod Adonai nir'ah. And as Aaron spoke to the whole Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there in a cloud appeared the presence. Okay, so now we're going forward. So that's another manifestation of Kvod Adonai. And again, it's redirecting the people from the human leadership to, right, trying to like reconnect them to God and knowledge of God. Okay, now, so here a number of you brought up the issue of, was Moses invited in? Like, why couldn't Moses go in? Was there room for Moses? Was it a physical presence? And was Moses allowed to go in at that moment? So now we see the connection between Kvod Adonai and also just being called up. Asher Chaim, do you want to read? I'm getting a little tired of.
Sure.
Great.
Exodus 19:15.
Yes.
Vayomer el Am.
Okay, well, let me just say, so now we're approaching Sinai. Go ahead. I just wanted people to know what we're.
Vayomer el Am, he said to the nation, Heyu nechonim lishloshet yamim al tigishu el isha. Be ready for the third day. Do not come close to a woman. This is Moshe improvising on a shorter list of commands that God had given. Vayhi bayom hashlishi bihiyot haboker ויהי קולות וברקים וענן כבד על ההר, וקול שופר חזק מאוד. And it was on the third day, while morning was happening, there were thunders and lightnings and heavy cloud on the mountain, and the sound of a shofar, very strong. ויחרד כל עם אשר במחנה, and the nation in the camp shuddered, shook,
So
trembled.
just notice here that what's heavy, or what's kvod or kaved, is the cloud. It's not God's presence yet.
It's not a kavod, it's just kaved as an adjective, right?
Correct.
ויוסי משה את העם לקראת האלוהים מן המחנה, ויתייצבו בתחתית ההר. Moshe brought out the people towards Elohim from the camp, and they took a stand at the base of the mountain. והר סיני עשן כולו מפני אשר ירד עליו אדוני באש, ויעל עשונו כעשן הכבשן, ויחרד כל העם מאוד. Meanwhile, Mount Sinai was full of smoke in the face of the fact that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh had descended on it in fire, and its smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace, and the people shook and shuddered a lot. ויהי קול השופר הולך וחזק מאוד, משה ידבר והאלוהים יעננו בקול.
So note that God most often represents God's self in fire, and think back to the burning bush.
Meanwhile, the sound of shofar was getting stronger and stronger, very much so. Moshe would speak, and Elohim would respond in thunder or voice. וירד אדוני על הר סיני אל ראש ההר, ויקרא אדוני למשה אל ראש ההר, ויעל משה. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh descended onto Mount Sinai at the top of the mountain. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh called to Moshe, summoned him to the peak of the mountain, and Moshe went up.
So note here that God is clearly calling Moshe, right? Vayikra Adonai, right? Moses is invited or called to come up.
ויאמר אדוני אל משה, רד העד בעם, פן יהרסו אל אדוני לראות, ונפל ממנו רב. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to Moshe, go down, give testimony among the people, lest they destroy towards Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh to see, and many of them fall. וגם הכהנים הניגשים אל אדוני יתקדשו, פן יפרוס בהם. Also the Kohanim officiants who come close towards Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh shall sanctify themselves, lest Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh burst out against them.
Okay, so let's stay with that for just a second. So if the people go close to the mountain, they will be destroyed. The priests will be destroyed unless they become pure. So it sounds like the people cannot become pure enough to approach the mountain without danger or without destruction. So one of my professors, may his memory be blessed, at JTS, Yochanan Mufs, who's a world-class Bible scholar, said it was as if you get close to the mountain, you get electrocuted. And that has to do with...
Get what?
You get electrocuted. Like the force of God is so intense. But purifying oneself kind of allows you to get closer and be able to withstand that intensity. Okay, go on.
ויאמר משה אל אדוני, לא יוכל העם לעלות אל הר סיני, כי אתה העדות הבאנו לאמור, הגבל את ההר וקדשתו. Moshe said to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the people are not able to go up on Mount Sinai because you gave testimony through us to say, cordon off the mountain and sanctify it.
So remember God, Moshe's saying, right? You set a boundary around it. Don't worry about them sort of becoming electrocuted or, being destroyed by your force, because there's already a boundary around the mountain. And the way Yochanan Mupps described it, it's not like God is punishing them for coming too close. It's just like it's coming too close to, again, to like unprotected or unsheathed electrical power. It's an automatic sort of interaction that if you come too close, you will combust or you become electrocuted. Okay, hold on. We're going to take questions and comments soon. Go on.
ויאמר אליו אדוני, לך רד, ועלית אתה ואהרון עמך, הכהנים והעם אל יהרסו לעלות אל אדוני, פן יפרוץ בם. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said to him, go down, then come up, you with Aharon, with you. But the Kohanim, officiants, and the nation, let them not destroy to ascend to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, lest he burst out against them.
Right. So that sense of like almost God not being in control of God's own force, right? Let not the priests or the people break through to come up Adonai, lest, and there's no word there, lest something break out against them, right? Like, you know, how you feel sometimes like, you know, if something happens, you're going to explode and you don't feel like you're in control of it. So this is just explosion without necessarily a subject who's in control. Hold on, I see your hands. I'm not ready yet. I see one hand there and two hands here.
And here's one.
And there's one. And there's one.
As long as you see.
I see. I see you, Lachania.
Vayered Moshe el ha'am, vayomer alehem. Moshe went down to the nation, and ambiguous subject, he said to them.
Okay, good. All right, so now we were just in Exodus 19, and now let's look at Exodus 24, and then a couple more texts, and I'm opening it up.
Vayal Moshe el hahar, vaychase anan et hahar. Moshe went.
Okay, so this is, I'm sorry, this is after Sinai, and this is when Moses goes back up and hears the instructions for the tabernacle, the building of the tabernacle.
Moshe went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. Vayishkon kivod Adonai al har Sinai, vaychasehu ha'anan sheshet yamim, vayikra el Moshe bayom hashvi'i mitoch ha'anan. The kavod essence of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh dwelled like Mishkan style on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered him for 6 days, and he called to Moshe on the 7th day from the midst of the cloud. Umar'e kevod Adonai ke'esh ochelet berosh hahar le'einei bnei Yisrael. The appearance of God's kavod essence was like a devouring fire at the top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. Vayavo Moshe betoch ha'anan, vaya'al el hahar, vahi Moshe bahar 40 yom ve'arba'im layla. Moshe entered the cloud and went up towards the mountain, to the mountain, and Moshe was there in the mountain 40 days and 40 nights.
Great, so let's just parse this for a moment. So Moses goes up, and the cloud is covering the mountain. And then Kvod Adonai, right, is dwelling, right? So that's what it's interesting because this is pre-Mishkan, but there's a hint of Mishkan to come, right? The dwelling place for God that's not located in one time or space. So Kvod Adonai is on the mountain and is separate from the cloud, and the cloud is covering the mountain. And then God calls to Moshe from inside the cloud. And then the vision of the glory of God or the presence of God to the Israelites is like a consuming fire. And I reminded people before that Moshe sees the fire of God as a fire that doesn't consume in his first encounter with God way back in Exodus 2 or 3. Okay, and then Moses goes up, but again, Moses is called. Okay, so now look at the Gemara in Yoma 4b, the Talmud raises a contradiction. It is written in one place. I'm just going to do this in English for time's sake. Moses was not able to enter the tent of meeting because the cloud dwelt on it, right? So that's at the end. That's what we read originally at the end of Exodus. And it is written elsewhere, and Moses came into the cloud, as Moses just did. And this is a funny resolution, but note that they're noting the contradiction. This teaches that the Holy One, blessed be they, grabbed Moses and brought him into the cloud since he could not enter upon it. Okay? That's very cool, right? Okay. And that's very different than the sense of Vayikra, that Moses was called up. Okay, so now two more pieces, and then I'm going to open things up. So I think this is, and this recalls what Paul said earlier on. This is a essay in Torah.com, which, if anyone is interested in academic perspectives on the Bible, is really a very rich resource. It says the kavod depicted there, meaning at the end of Exodus, is very much physical. The cloud is what protects human beings from potentially fatal exposure to the intense energy of Adonai's presence. Okay, and then one more, and this is from Robert Alter, who wrote a commentary on the 5 books of Moses, and it says, the cloud and the glory appear to be virtual synonyms, or at the very least overlapping terms. The Lord's glory, kavod, is clearly a palpably concrete manifestation of the deity for all the metaphysical attributes that later theology would attach to it. In other words, the Torah's notion of God, physical. Later on, right, medieval philosophy, nothing physical about God. In fact, nothing you could say about God at all. It may have been imagined as a kind of mantle of light enveloping God, with the cloud giving off a luminosity by day, parallel to the fire by night. Okay, stopping my share. And I see Richard's been waiting for a while, and then a few people in the room. Richard.
Hi, thanks, and Shabbat Shalom.
Is it okay
if I'll go back to the small olive?
Yeah, Richard, come back a little. You can, but we're still getting there, but come a little closer to the computer.
Okay, so the small olive is about calling, and it's all the passages that you've been reading are about sort of a hierarchy of how close people can get to the cloud or to Adonai or whatever. There's sort of a limitation on what anybody can do, and as we know, even for Moses. So the Vayikra may be either for Moses' part or God's part, a kind of reluctance. Don't get too close. I'm calling you, but remember. And it bookended by the end of the portion, which is you can't go into the Mishkan when the cloud is there. So it's a sort of a general theme throughout this portion about and Exodus about the limitations on people's either the people's ability or reluctance to get close, and God's willingness to let it happen. There's this ongoing, and for all of us, permanent inability to really know what Adonai is or does or what he occupies. So there's this bookending in the portion about getting close.
Yeah. Getting close, the intensity of God, the fear of God, the limitations of human beings, very complicated and dangerous. Okay, so now Nikki was waiting.
Yeah.
Semya.
2 brief comments.
And Alina.
It reminds me of my modern days, God has no body and no form, because the cloud it really doesn't have a form of cloud.
Yes, correct. And neither does fire for that.
Nor does fire.
Right.
And
both are formless or
formless.
Shifting form.
So it's already there, this nebulous quality. And the other question is there?
Wait, how was that a question? What was the question?
The question is there another religion in the region that has this? This is a completely Hebrew invention. inspiration. It's fabulous. It's
With the
unbelievable.
fire in the cloud?
Yeah, the fire.
There's storm
There are
gods, there's
fire-
storm gods in
fire
Near
gods.
Eastern religion. There's storm gods, for sure. And we see evidence of that, especially in Psalms, right? Imagery from the storm gods. What's the second question?
That's it.
Oh, good. Chemya, welcome. I haven't seen you in so long. So good to see you.
You said it right.
And I said it right, finally. Go ahead, Nechemya.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Rabbi and Kila Kedusha. I'm so happy to be able to come again. And to listen to this beautiful Divrei Elohim. The perspective I want to highlight is that since my Shekhinah Kundalini, whatever name you call her, the immanent aspect of God.
What's a Shekhinah Kundalini?
Shekhinah has many names, and one of the names is Kundalini.
Oh, Lo Yadati. Okay.
Shakti. Yeah, she has so many names. And every culture different name. The Sufis call it Ruah. So anyway, since she was awakening in me close to 50 years ago, I was trying to get closer and closer and closer. And I've seen other people. And when people try to get too fast, they are burnt. And I was almost burnt myself. And then they have to they don't die, but they can become crazy a little bit, but usually they have to take a distance.
Like a bad trip.
Yeah, like a bad trip. Yeah, because they are not ready. So what the people of Israel are instructed to do by sitting there is to sit and to get as deep as they can before they move, because they're sitting. So when they're still, they have a chance to go deeper by being still. Because when they move, they are not as deep. So as long as a cloud is closed, sit down and go deep inside, and from this power, you can move and you don't have to be as deep. So they will go more to the still, what do you call it? Lekol Mamadaka, deeper and deeper beyond the mind.
Still small voice.
To be beyond the mind.
Still silent voice.
And when they move, some of this power will help us to move. So the same thing as it was there, it's here. We are sitting here, we are going as deep as we can. And then we move and try to take some of this power with us, especially
we move upstairs to tefillah.
Yeah, and we go deep again. And then so all the time we go deep and then try to manifest it in our life.
Beautiful, thank you.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Okay, Alina.
So I will take off from there because I just keep going into this unity, that in order to function in the world, we have to separate, we have to have polarity. So when the cloud is there, and also even, it's not so much a danger of when the will be consumed, but we will lose our separateness. And we can't function in a way with that without that separateness. So in a way, I sort of go with the same thing you were talking.
So go back and forth into the world of unity.
Yeah.
Which, like, the daily world doesn't work that way.
Right.
And then you go out into the world of distinction.
Right.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Oh no, now there are a lot more hands. What am I gonna do? Uh-oh, what you said, just like waterfall. Okay, so raise your hands again. Okay, all right, Rob. And then Ezra, and then Jesse and Paul, but you spoke already. You said only a brief comments, I'll let go.
Due to my lack of a formal Jewish education,
Yeah.
I look at everything in terms of movies. So
That's a good way. I look at everything through the lens of Seinfeld.
So what I don't understand here, and again, I don't understand God, obviously, but it starts off, they destroy the Egyptian army.
Destroy.
Right. Now they're up,
And the wheels get heavy, right?
and the Jewish people are overlooking, right, the entire destruction. They were slaves for 270 years. Wouldn't that have been the time for God to come down and say, listen, I just saved you, you were slaves, I'm God, these are my laws, let's go. Instead, it's shock and awe. Moses, he's gone for, I mean, the whole story makes like somewhat no sense in terms of if God wanted to have a relationship with the Jewish people, that was the opportunity.
Let me ask you something. Okay, so let me ask you a few questions. Was that the moment? Did God need to say that at that moment? Well, why did God need to say that?
Well, he came he's in the Mishkan for some reason, right?
Later.
No, but I'm saying to his presence on earth is no one did anything until this. This is the first encounter with the Jewish people.
When they go through the Sea of Reeds, you're saying?
No, the Mishkan, where Hashem comes down and his presence is felt
So
on
why
earth.
is that the first encounter? What about Sinai? Why is that the first encounter?
Well, okay, so
what
this,
about the plagues? What about the instructions for the Passover? What about a million things?
but that was all through kind of Moses, and they never really saw anything, and they couldn't approach the mountain, and it was all.
Well, Sinai, they heard God's voice directly.
Yes, that they did.
Because I think I'm not understanding your question.
My question is, this all could have been done in a much gentler, kinder way. It seems like it doesn't
It's
seem
not
like
Yud Babe's
it
way.
doesn't seem like a good movie, actually speaking. But it just doesn't make sense, the whole order of things. Anyway, to me.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I don't have a real answer for you right now. I think I have an answer, but it'll be way too long. So I'm going to give you the short answer.
Okay.
So when I was a teenager and very rebellious, my mother would keep saying to me, well, I am your mother. And didn't hear it for a moment. So I think the question is, when are they ready to hear what? Right? And they couldn't hear the voice of Sinai. They were terrified. Right? And then the building of the Mishkan was exactly so that God could modulate God's presence appropriately, like a good parent, and the children of Israel could take it in. But I think it had to wait for that right moment. I think I'm not addressing all of your question.
Oh, okay.
A little something?
Yeah.
Okay.
No Oscar, but yes.
That's right.
I think I'm just stuck on the idea of these two very contrasting substances of the fire and the cloud,
Yeah.
which is essentially water.
Yeah.
And how you have the alpha and omega in there, and we exist within the between, and we're only allowed to move in that in between.
And what?
We're only allowed to move in that in between of between the fire when it tells us to go, to stop, and between the water when it tells us to go.
Is there a question there?
No,
That was beautiful.
Just thinking.
So think more, because we're doing the cloud and the fire later during services.
Okay.
But that was really beautiful. Like the binary of the cloud and the fire, and why those two substances. Yeah. Okay. Jesse and then Paul.
Not sure if this has sort of already been said, but it seems like a recurring theme that we don't want to ever be fully connected to God. We always want to be seeking, that there's a certain way in which our imperfection and our yearning is important. That, we don't want to be Stepford wives. We don't want to be done, right? A relationship is always imperfect. We want to be in relationship with God. We want to be in relationship with one another, and it's going to be
But you
hard.
want to have moments of fulfillment?
You do,
Or do you
but
only want to be seeking?
But well, the seeking, I think, is a moment of fulfillment, like you were saying, right? You get close and it's amazing, but you don't. If you get there, like, you're done. Like,
There's
what are you
no
gonna,
completion.
yeah, because what are you going to do then?
Yes.
You know, you don't want to be a Stepford wife.
Yeah,
You
and
want to be,
yeah, absolutely.
you know.
And I think the text really speaks to that. There's this closeness, and then there's a little invitation. And I think Richard was talking about that. As well.
Yeah.
Right.
A
There's
lot of people
always
bringing it.
there's always a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the Torah is telling us, if there's no boundary, then there's no humanity.
Yeah.
Right. You can't see God's face and live, because you'd stop being human.
Yeah.
If you completely saw God.
It's a celebration of imperfection and the human condition and the messiness.
I heard recently of a mystic. Okay, I don't remember the name. I think a Sufi mystic. Maybe somebody knows. It's really a sort of a partial memory of who didn't eat and drink for weeks because they lived beholding God. And that was like, help me understand why someone would not live and see God at the same time. It's just like there's no desire to eat or drink or just have like normal human discourse.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, Paul.
I'm wondering why this story is in the Torah. Why do
Which story?
The story of Moses and the tent of settlement and his capacity to enter the tent? Why is the Torah telling us this story? And my answer to that question is that it is a story about intentionality. God, the divine, has chosen to fill the space. It was a decision. The divine could have chosen to allow Moses to enter the space, but the divine chose not to. And that's a very interesting question. And to me, it harkens back to creation itself. And the ultimate question is why God decided to begin. And that's how it began. The beginning wasn't the beginning. The beginning was the intention to begin. And that's what the story is trying to tell us.
And that brings forward a further thought related to Sarah and the idea of Simpson, right? So there are moments where God contracts God's self, and there are moments when God doesn't. And it seems like filling the tabernacle at this moment, is God is like I'm going to allow my presence to manifest, right? Because God wants to, because the Mishkan is finally created, and God has been sort of holding back for all this time. And now, like, I'm here. There's no space for you.
And that's the ultimate mystery. We'll never understand.
Okay, good. All right. Helio, I see your hand. I'm going to do a few more texts, which I think are the end of things, and then I'm going to call you. Okay. So, okay, here we go. So I'm going to just, yeah, we're almost there. Oh my God, amazing. Okay. So in Exodus 33 is really interesting because the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, which is usually seen as synonymous with the Mishkan, is here pitched outside of the camp. And it says, Moshe Yikach the Ohel v'natzalo michutz lamachaneh, harchek min hamachaneh, v'kara lo Ohel Moed, v'aya kol mevakesh Adonai yitzeh Ohel Moed asher michutz lamachaneh. Now Moses, and this is after the whole golden calf episode, and before the great rapprochement, right before, between, the forgiveness moment between Moshe and God. Now Moses would take the tent and pitch it outside the camp at some distance from the camp. Was called the tent of meeting, and whoever saw Adonai would go out to the tent of meeting that was outside the camp. So it was much more democratic. You want to go see God? Come to the tent of meeting outside the camp. והיה תצא משה אל האוהל, יקומו כל העם ונדבו איש פתח אוהלו, והביטו אחרי משה עד בואו האוהלה. Remember, Moses went to the tent, all the people would rise and stand at the entrance of each tent and gaze after Moses until he had entered the tent. והיה כבוא משה האוהלה, ירד עמוד הענן, ועמד פתח האוהל, ודיבר עם משה. When Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent while God spoke with Moses. But we don't see Kvod Adonai. That's interesting. We don't see the glory of God or the presence of God. All the people saw the pillar of God, pillar of cloud, poised at the entrance of the tent. All the people would rise and bow low at the entrance of each tent. So it's clearly a moment of awe. Now look at this. This is interesting. The Diber Adonai El Moshe Panim El Panim. Asher Yidaber Ish El Re'ehu Vashad El Hamachaneh Musharto. Yehoshua Ben Nun Na'ar Lo Yamish U'Tokah. Adonai would speak to Moses face to face as one person speaks to another. So that's interesting. Like they're just having a conversation face to face. So remember, no human being can see God's face and live, but clearly they can talk to each other face to face. This is an incredible moment of intimacy. Wherever. Then he would then return to the camp, but his attendant Joshua, son of Nun, serving as deputy, would not stir out of the tent. Okay, so now see what happens. Right, this is amazing. Now we're in Vayikra, that a number of you have been referring to. Vayikra El Moshe. So there was no calling at the end of Exodus, but there's a calling immediately at the beginning of Leviticus, right? So we skip those 4 lines, remember? Skip those 4 lines in the Torah scroll, right? Moshe can't go into the tent and there's no calling. And here there's a calling and it has a small aleph. Okay. Now, Vayikra el Moshe, v'yidaber Adonai elav me'ohel mo'ed lemor. And it says Adonai called to Moses, but it just says here Vayikra el Moshe. It doesn't say Adonai called to Moshe. So that's interesting. There's calling to Moses, and then it says, and God spoke to him from Ohel Moed. Clearly, God's still in there saying. Doesn't matter what he said, but I'm just talking about the call. Now, couldn't find this in the original. I'm sorry, but this is the English. Midrash Hagadol, and if anyone has it, please send it to me. Said Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, can it be that Moses feared the cloud? Is it not already written? Moses entered into the midst of the cloud. In what sense was he not able, referring to Moshe not being able to go into the Mishkan at the end of Exodus? Because Moshe accorded honor to the Shekhinah and did not enter until he was summoned inside. So you see all these places where it says Vayikra. Actually, I'm going to use the word consent, right? One doesn't approach God until one is called, right? And God consents to their approach. And in fact, there's a halacha, there's a Jewish law that's based on all this that says, like, you don't just start talking to somebody until you know that they're willing to hear you, which I love, because a lot of people, right, want to talk to you without knowing that you're ready to hear them. Right? Could you imagine, like, really being aware? Like, is another person ready to hear what you have to say at that moment? Or are they ready for your